I'm Richard Rooley. This afternoon I'm going to be talking about ethics, every aspect of ethics, but all precisely within the building industry, and in particular the HVAC, the heating, ventilating, air conditioning, and total building services. During this talk I'm going to address ethics at levels. Firstly, morals, honesty and integrity. That which we are taught from our mother's knee to tell the truth and be honest. Secondly, I'll talk about the breaking of society codes. That's within the way we work within ASHRAE. ASHRAE has a code of ethics. When we work in our 200 technical and standards committees, when we work in our multitude of managing committees, when we work at our chapters, we obey the ASHRAE Code of Ethics. And I'll talk about that at some length. I then go into the way we make our living, our main jobs, the procurement of buildings, and the way our buildings fit into the environment. Most of the governance of all countries is based on religious background, be it sun worshippers, tree worshippers, Christians, Muslims, humanists, or whatever. I work quite closely with the many faiths in my hometown, and there is a remarkable similarity in the way we deal with our neighbours. All such backgrounds acknowledge there is something beyond ourselves, but concentrate mainly on the way in which we work with one another in a relationship to one another, and to love your enemy as yourself, love your neighbour as yourself. Architects must love engineers, not hate them. The way we work together positively is a vital thing which we have to follow, and we have to follow it through. The breaking of society codes. Now I'm including in this section a discussion of ASHRAE in its code of ethics, which are written for the practicing engineer. And I'm going to talk about the National Society of Professional Engineers in America. And I shall also talk about the way that qualifications are set worldwide. Because remember, ASHRAE is 55,000 members, of whom some 15% are overseas. We also know that Americans work throughout the world, and I know, for example, in Pakistan they're working in the Middle East. In Britain they're working throughout Europe. We all work with one another. So in the ASHRAE Code there's a very strong thing that you must follow the code of ethics of your professional trade body, and you must also respect the code of ethics in the state where you are working, what is called the seat of the project. Now, a few words about NSPE, the American organization that sets the standard for professional engineer. Across America, each state registers engineers. Each state sets an exam, which is technical and includes an ethics paper. It requires qualification to, let's say, simply to degree standard. It requires continuing education points, and it requires a high level of behavior. You cannot design in America without NSPE. Elsewhere in the world, this is not the case. The qualification to become a chartered engineer in Britain or many other parts of the world is a qualification set by the various engineering institutions. In Britain, the Institute of Civil Engineers, the Chartered Institution of Building Services Engineers, they are all work together through the Engineering Council to ensure the standard is at the right level. The standard is a qualification by degree, probably to master's level, followed by experience, followed by interview and acceptance. This states that this particular person is qualified to practice, but it is not a registration. It is a recognition. On major projects, it is very rare that it will be designed by someone who is not a chartered engineer. There are occasions when a very well experienced engineer will undertake a design, it's acceptable and it's good. But generally, chartered engineer is the required level. So we have these two quite different bases. Again, let's return to NSPE. You're registered in a state, and I'm just going to give a couple of examples, that if you design in one state, you must be registered in that state. If you design in that state, you must have the full registration, the full awareness, you must have had your degree, you must continue to work. You can then stamp the drawing with your personal stamp. An example which did come up to NSPE, where in a state, a company who did not have a stamp had it designed, a project designed from outside state by a very competent engineer. He did an extremely good design and they were all set to go to site and get on with it. But it had to be stamped. So the company got an engineer in that state, registered in that state, to stamp the drawing. Having checked it, he checked the design by the first engineer and was satisfied that it was of good quality. But he had not supervised the design of that scheme. Therefore, he contravened the code of ethics, was thrown out, fined, and he couldn't apply to get back in for another year. This seems harsh, but it is the way that the American engineer works. Elsewhere in the world, that would not have mattered. It would have mattered if it hadn't been a chartered engineer and it went to court because of a failure, and in cross-examination, the designer was asked, "Are you a chartered engineer?" Reply, "No." Then the examining lawyer would cross-examine it in great detail as to why that engineer was or was not competent. Chartered engineer gives that competence. I've looked through the NSPE, returning to the American state, the results of complaints which have been made. The great majority of them are to do with misrepresentation of title, of misrepresentation of qualifications on the way to PE, and not keeping PE up to date. I agree with the principle of policing in this way, but I have some regrets that it is so much devoted and focused on the things such as title. I've looked through the findings to see how many engineers who were had up in court in a case between a claimant and a respondent because of a failure of the system, and lo and behold, they were never reported for failure to use due care and attention. I read through the ASHRAE Handbook recently, and I've been involved with the writing of the handbook from time to time. And I read the disclaimer on the front page, and I'll read it out to you. ASHRAE has compiled this publication with care, but ASHRAE has not investigated, and ASHRAE expressly disclaims any duty to investigate any product, service, process, procedure, design, or the like, which may be described herein. The appearance of any technical data or editorial material in this publication does not constitute endorsement, warranty or guarantee by ASHRAE of any product, service, process, procedure, design or the like. ASHRAE does not warrant that the information in this publication is free of errors. The entire risk of the use of any information in this publication is assumed by the user. Wow. We think our handbooks are the best thing that ever was. We believe that the tables in there are the best things, the most accurate things that there could ever be. Yet, it is the designer's responsibility to take full responsibility for that table. It's easy if we're just talking about pipe sizing and duct sizing, because there are always margins of error. If it's a little bit out here or there, it doesn't matter too much. But we do have an awful lot of tables in there which are quite scientific and based on a lot of very deep research. What is our individual ethical position when we use that handbook? Are we saying we're using the ASHRAE Handbook, even though there's a disclaimer to say that I don't really know what I'm doing, or not? I say this because I don't quite understand and I don't quite know where the ethics of the use of the handbook lie. It's a powerful statement. It's stating very clearly that any designer, any practitioner who uses the handbook cannot rely in court on that as a defence. I've been cross-examined in court and I have based my evidence on standards which are normal at the time. The handbook probably would be acceptable in court, but if you do go into court as an expert witness or as a defendant, be sure that you have a clear answer to any question which says, there is a disclaimer in the handbook, what steps did you take to check it? I think it's ethical to say that you've used best endeavours, that it is generally taken to be correct, and therefore, with all due diligence, I used the handbook. But others may argue slightly differently. Let's talk for a few moments about ethical performance within committees. I'm about to give a number of examples based on complaints which have been made either in ASHRAE or in the Chartered Institution of Building Services Engineers in Britain or in the Royal Academy of Engineering in Britain. All three have a code of conduct, a code of ethics, and they all rely for a great deal of their work on the way committees work together. So let me give you a few examples. An ASHRAE committee is set up to have balance, to write a standard. The rules say that there must be a balance between interested parties. So if one manufacturer is on that standards committee, they should have no more than 2 members, and there should be a balance of the membership to ensure there is not bias in favour of one part of the industry. It should not be written by a company. It should be written by a committee. And it follows the ABET rules. Now, if it isn't, just take an example that could happen. A member with a particular interest did not attend a standards committee meeting. Therefore, that voice was silent. That point of view was not taken into account. Would it have been ethically correct for another member of the committee to say, Joe Bloggs isn't here today? He would have said, I chaired the finance committee, and at one point, one of our strongest members wasn't there. So I put a seat at the table for him and invited anyone who would bring forward his argument to raise it at the meeting, so that we could be aware of what that person would have said had they been there. And some did. It made us a much better decision-making process. I think this balance is not a competitive thing, it's a matter of working together. But let's remind ourselves that at a technical committee, they're responsible for updating the handbook, they're responsible for getting programme into the society meetings, very often leading toward the writing of the handbook. So there are seminars, symposia, various forms of meeting. And then you have technical papers, which are at a higher level with higher review, and then it is written in. They also have a responsibility for awarding research funding. Let's suppose that on one of those committees, there are a couple of people who did not declare their interest and did in fact get research funding allowed for a particular bit of work, which was then awarded to the institution with which they were loosely connected. Was that ethically right or wrong? It did a very good job, but still within the ASHRAE code, it was the wrong way to do it. They should have declared their interest in setting up the research work. One that came up just this year, that in a meeting, they're discussing at a technical committee a programme for the next meeting. And it becomes a very robust discussion. It's very heated. And in the heat of the moment, one of the engineers says, "Oh, don't be a silly woman." That resulted in a complaint of sexism. Had a woman said, "Oh, you silly man," would that have been sexism? We are entering a new world, I think, in this area, where we have to re-educate ourselves on the words we use and be careful. Ethically, we must be absolutely correct. But what is correct? There is a bit of a problem emerging in this particular area. Nominating committee, who are responsible for nominating the office of the society and for the directors and regional chairmen and directors, they meet. They meet in executive session. It is a very closely guarded and followed process. You can only discuss the candidates in absolute executive session. Nothing must be allowed to get out. And it is known that this doesn't always happen. And it is also known that lobbying of various sorts take place. Where is the ethical line between doing deals, you vote for this guy and I'll vote for that guy? Is that ethical or not? Or is it? This is a difficult area. I've heard it being discussed quite often over the last few years. I don't think it can be solved, apart from trying to instill in ourselves an awareness of ethics, an awareness of that which is correct and that which is incorrect. I'm now going to talk about our industry, the way we work within it, the way that we work together in it. And I'm going to give a number of examples. Some are very broad and some very particular. I'm going to look at a few slides to show the complexity of how we really do work. The first slide shows who decides the performance of a building, who gets in the way of a good performance of a building, and why don't we produce the buildings which we and our clients would like to see. This is a simple picture of the dream building, where you'll see it's absolutely perfect. A very happy person sits at a desk. The humidity is right, the temperature's right, everything is absolutely perfect. But let the design and construction teams in at it, and the second picture shows what we tend to get. Another picture of our industry. We start on the left with a concept. The client wants a building, a hospital, a defense department, a building, or any operation like a school or an office. We then go through a process where many different designers, architect, mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, public health engineer, plumber, cost control, landscape, all these designers get to work. Manufacturers are brought in. Sometimes the manufacturer who was first thought of, but quite often it is bid down and other manufacturers come in. But as it goes through, it works perfectly until you get a satisfied client. Except this picture is another picture of the same industry. A brief is developed. Then it goes to the design team, who start to do battle with one another. You then have the contractors come in and more battles take place. And eventually, through this battleground of tensions on site, we get to a handover. Worldwide, I've asked the question, has anyone ever compared the handover document with the original brief? Very, very rarely, and only on very specialist projects, is there a straight comparison. Generally, it's how we can manage to get the thing work when we can hand it over. But also at that point, your operations engineer is expecting full documentation, a full set of drawings, a full set of instructions which relate to that specific project, not typical, specific with actual numbers within it. He doesn't get it. The designers, the funders, everyone involved up to the point of handover wants to get paid. They want to get out as fast as they can. That is, except the HVAC engineer. I've actually seen handover certificates signed by an architect or the appropriate officer, which says everything is complete with the exception of the air conditioning system, in brackets, which we couldn't get to work. How often have we all had this? How often are we told this? The system just does not work. We don't know how to use the thermostat. We don't know how to switch the lights on. Someone said to me the other day, it's a terrible thing in our office when we go into a conference room because we have to find the handheld switch which by wireless switches the lights on and off. You have to take your phone out your pocket, switch on your torch and hope to goodness that the last occupant of the room didn't carry it away with them. Now, is that good design, bad design, ethics? I've become, in the preparation for this talk, more and more convinced that we do know how to do it. It's just we don't. Now, if we don't do it, is it the ethics or that which is correct, the way we love our neighbour, or is it trade usage? Is it accepted that we all get it wrong? I hope it isn't. Many of us have been arguing that we have a higher duty of care to our clients, but we haven't changed enough yet. I would say that I've just been sitting on the day of the filming at a committee meeting in the ASHRAE headquarters talking about the progress of the new building. The contractors were there, the designers were listening in, the client was there. There was a very full discussion of the way in which the building would be used. I sat there in a sense of joy that they were actually talking about the things which I was worried about. When I said to them, we often have pinch points in the programme, and when I saw that the completion of the ceilings and the lighting and the inspection of the pipework systems and the commissioning was a bit tight, they immediately came back and told me they'd thought about it. Many sites I visit and have visited, there is no thought given. You've been told it can be commissioned in a month, but in the event it turns out that unfortunately the contractor hadn't finished cleaning out the floors. So the HVAC engineer was trying to commission in a dirty building. It failed. Is that an ethical matter or just normal practice? I cannot accept that that is good practice. If it's bad practice, it does come under what I'm defining as the overall concept of ethics. Knowing this scenario, I had a chat, again on my way over here, with a taxi driver who drives one of the directors of one of those organisations. And he was saying how this scheme was going on and on and on. But the director of that company, the consultant, was delighted because it meant the fees kept flowing in. He was making millions in fees on a job which he knew was going to hit trouble. Each one of us on our projects does have similar examples if we have time to stop and think about it. We're reporting to our clients, we see how the trends of the industry go, we see shortages coming. We are fully aware, we're professional HVAC engineers. Should we take note of these other things around the perimeter? Or should we say, no, I'll just stay in my own area? I was talking with a High Court judge in London, and I asked him what's the biggest problem he has in making a judgment or trying to get parties to come to an agreement on a case where there's a dispute. He said his biggest problem is separate professional indemnity insurance. Each designer has a different professional indemnity insurance. So when he, the judge, is faced with having to push together the parties to reach agreement, he's not actually talking to the architect, the engineer, he is talking to the insurance companies behind them. We are an industry of lots of little bits, each with separate insurance, separate responsibility, and then we try and put it all together. Does it work? It must work. It wouldn't be satisfactory in any other industry except the building industry. Now, in a project, as I said on the first slides, there's an interaction between the consulting engineer, the architect, the quantity surveyor, the specialist design groups. On many occasions, the client will provide product. Supermarkets is one example. They will provide all the freezer equipment to be standard. I've also come across it in Ministry of Defence projects where the client, the customer, will do a lot of the work. In this coming and going, in this assembling of the mathematical models, in the assembling of the BIM drawings, suddenly someone in an office says, it's going wrong. Help! I can't get my stuff in. I can't do what I've said I could do. Codes of ethics say if you think you've made a mistake, you must immediately report it to the customer. Your insurer will say, no way can you ever report a failure that you have made to the client. What do I do? Do I follow my insurer's instructions? Do I follow my code of conduct? Do I follow whatever? What code should I follow? Or is there something natural that we should be doing in this case? Take an example. An air conditioning system, recirculating fan coils in the ceilings, ground floor ceiling, there's recirculation through the ceiling void. Air is extracted, allowed to drift into the ceiling void, mixed with incoming outside air and introduced into the space. This is the void between the upper first floor and upper ceiling and the second floor. Outside the building there's a walkway, and there are gaps between the supports of that walkway and the ceiling void on the ground floor, or in American terms the first floor. Air gets into that gap. Whose error is it? Now this happened on a job. I've been asked to go in and look at the failure in the system, and there was some reason that we could not control the conditions in the space. A quick look above the ceiling showed that there were holes sideways going from the ceiling void out to the outside because of the walkway. This was an error, a simple error of the relationship taking place at the relationship between the architect and the engineer. They missed it. I met the original designer of the project on site. He put his head up into the ceiling void and said, "I've made a mistake. Help." He confessed it and immediately said he put it right, and it was done as cheaply as possible, and the client was delighted. What a wonderful ethical response. But, as I've just said, that would not be acceptable in most insurance companies' eyes. There is a risk of owning up to doing things in the wrong way. Let's talk for a moment about standards. The design part of standards. We all design to standards. We all design to our handbook. We obey the standards. In America, there are standards issued by ASHRAE and taken on board by the various states. So in America, the engineer will work to the state standard, not the ASHRAE standard, the state standard. In Britain and Europe, the European codes of standards apply, the Euro standard. Throughout the world, generally, our work is done to either the European standards or American standards. So we have a clear standard which we must follow. On a couple of occasions, I've looked at the standard and said, there's a better way. If we can put the standard to one side, we could in fact do a better job. On each occasion, I looked at it, went to the client, then went to the standards monitoring body and declared I want to do that. And they agreed and said, on your own head be it. So all right, we did it and it worked because we worked it out very carefully. I believe I was being ethically correct in doing that. I broke the standard, but I did it in an ethical way. Another thing on standards. American standards tend to be prescriptive standards, which tell you exactly how to do a thing. European standards are performance standards. So in an energy code in Britain, it will say, these are the targets you must hit. Hit them which way you can do it. The American standard is much more prescriptive and will tell you precisely how to do each part of it. Both are correct. Both must be fully understood by the engineer who's doing the work, And the ethics of this comes in is actually following them, knowing them, doing them, and knowing the interreaction of them. There's a bit of discussion going on at the moment, particularly in America, and to a similar extent worldwide, that standards are being driven for zero energy. We're being told to use less and less and less energy. ASHRAE, correctly, is stating the ideal. Perhaps, though, it is not the ethical and correct way to do it. By following a zero energy standard, we may save the world, but we'll have a less productive workforce in the space. In the last talk in this series, a wonderful case was made for increasing to at least 40% the relative humidity in a space for performance of the workforce and for health. A wonderful case. But that's expensive. Do we ethically have to say, as designers, to our clients, I'm designing this office block for you. I want to design it with a humidity that's above 40%. It's only going to cost you an extra 15% to do it. The client will probably say, no way. I don't want to have humidification in that building. One, it's going to cost me more to put it in. Two, it's going to cost me more to run it. And third, there's always the risk of higher maintenance costs. There's a balance. Where does that put us as ethical ASHRAE engineers? I have just described the full scenario. In our looking at the way we go into a discussion of that sort, I believe it's vital that we hold this ethical element right at the heart of what we do. The comparison between zero energy, state requirements, company requirements. Another example, in data centers, it is necessary to hold the humidity below 20%. In manufacturing of pharmaceutical pills, again, you must hold it below 20%. That is enormously costly. The energy use is massive. But we need our data and we need our pills. I don't think this is an ethical dilemma. But if we hang our hats on the fact that everything must be zero energy as an ethical thing, we lose the professionalism we have as engineers in a real world in which we have to live. Some years ago, I was asked by a government group to look at construction as a manufacturing process. This was at the time when computers were really coming into their own. I took evidence from designers, manufacturers, contractors, everyone I could think of talking to. One of the big dilemmas that came up was that manufacturers found it much better to provide specials, a special product, than a standard product. I was trying to argue that if we can assemble a building in packages, plug the packages together, fully designed, fully operational, and then we can put a bit of fancy stuff on the outside to make it look good. Powerful argument against me was from the two sides. The architects and engineers stated that this wouldn't allow them to fully fulfill their God-given right to produce wonderful buildings. I argued against that, saying that if you have standard components within a product, within a building, it doesn't make the buildings look exactly the same. The manufacturers were quite adamant about this difference in profit margin between special product and standard product a difficult one, and I'm not sure where it's going to go. I do know of a number of major projects being built around the world using standard product. I do know that architects and engineers don't like to do that. We're in the middle of changes. Are the changes pure technical fashion, or are they ethics? I believe that reliability is more important than a beautiful finish. I believe that correctly working product is more important than let's do something exciting. When we were talking about a building which had quite a lot of product being donated to it, I asked the question, firstly, are we sure that this matches into the design? I was told quite unequivocally, yes, it does. But secondly, I was saying, are we using prototype, wonderful, exciting new product that will actually work magnificently? To which I say, has it been proved? Oh no, but it's going to be marvellous. We owe a duty of care to our clients. We have an ethical duty of care to ensure that everything we design works and enables the occupier of the building to get on with making profit out of their business. Within the society, within the research associations, and within our design offices, we talk a lot about indoor air quality. Sick building syndrome was big some years ago. Now it's productivity, measuring productivity. The last talk on the influence of humidity on productivity. A lot of work has been done since, really only in the last 20 years, by Maslow and Herzog, which are saying, what are the basic needs of a human? And at the highest point, what are their emotional satisfaction and joy? That's Maslow. Herzog starts the other way round and tries to define those things which make a person satisfied and those which prevent them being satisfied. Now, the findings have been, and interesting, one of the biggest companies in Britain, supermarket chain, use this model in the training of their people. That productivity, reduction of errors in work, and everything that's to do with the performance and profitability of the company is based on the culture and way of working of the company. Other matters are referred to as safety elements. In other words, those things which make it possible for the culture of a company to be fully developed to give high productivity. I suggest that everything we do comes under the safety area. If I was starting my life again and designing projects, I would just ask the question, as I used to do, Mr. Client, Mr. Occupier, how will you maintain this building? If they say, we will go to tender based on a fully all-enveloping tender document for a maintenance and operation contractor, I'll say, no, you won't. Tell me how you'll really do it. Very often we'd end up with, I'll maintain it when it breaks or when it says it's going to break. I'm a very great proponent of building management systems. Find out what you want a building to do. Make sure you know how it tells you when it fails to do that in some way and what's the mode of failure. It's in the ASHRAE material. Now, if we are judged in our building by the safety of the system, I would design it on the basis that it will be easily maintained, that it will work on day one, because the culture of a building is set when the people move in. If it's too hot in the building on day one, it will stay too hot. So it is vital that we get it right first time. I'm aware that I am perhaps saying things which are against the normal culture of our industry. But putting an ethical look on the way we do things, I would say that we must provide conditions which are correct and will support the culture of that business and will enable it to be operated the way the customer wants it to be operated on day one, and that it will continue to operate at that level. We, on the other hand, are trapped or could be trapped into the highest possible performance of the building. What is ethical? To save energy to the finest decimal point, or to ensure that the occupant of the building can work effectively and satisfactorily? Very short bit on this slide about ethics in practice, which are never reported and no complaints are made, even when a party has been found guilty. Now, faults which are found in courts or in arbitration include time delay, cost overrun, failure to operate as designed, incompetent maintenance, giving false evidence, using wrong standards and technical information. I've had every one of those in court, including falsification of evidence. The ASHRAE Code requires us to work within areas of competence and expertise, our own area of expertise, using and developing up-to-date knowledge and skills, and avoid real or perceived conflicts of interest. Simply stated, why don't we get on and do it?